It wasn't guilt I felt when I watched him shake hands with the guests. It was something closer to dread, the kind that settles in your chest like cold water and doesn't move, no matter how many times you tell yourself you're being ridiculous. My daughter married Callum on a Saturday in late September. The leaves had just started turning along the Rideau River, that particular orange you only see in eastern Ontario, and the venue, a converted stone farmhouse outside of Kemptville, looked like something out of a magazine. My wife had cried for a week, just picking the centerpieces. I had smiled through every conversation, every toast rehearsal, every tasting menu. I was happy for her, I was. But something about Callum had always made me feel like I was standing on ice I couldn't see the thickness of. He was 36, an investment consultant out of Ottawa. Well-spoken, good handshake, knew when to laugh and when to be serious. He called me sir until I asked him not to, and then he called me by my first name with exactly the right amount of ease. My daughter, she had met him at a colleague's housewarming 2 years earlier. She was 32, a speech-language pathologist, the kind of person who remembered everyone's coffee order and visited her grandmother every second Sunday without being asked. She deserved someone who loved her the way she deserved to be loved. I had never been able to say, clearly and specifically, what bothered me about Callum. My wife told me I was protective. My brother said I'd feel this way about anyone my daughter married. My daughter herself had laughed once and said, "Dad, you just don't like losing me." Maybe they were all right. Maybe I was the problem. The ceremony was at 4 in the afternoon. My daughter walked beside me down an aisle of white chairs and dried wildflowers, and when I looked at her face I saw something I recognized. Calm, and underneath the calm, something watchful. Not nervous the way brides are nervous, something different. I noticed it and filed it away, the way you file away things you're not ready to look at yet. We danced the father-daughter dance to a Gordon Lightfoot song she'd loved since she was a teenager. She had her head on my shoulder, and we moved in that slow, half-step way that neither of us was graceful enough to improve on, and somewhere in the middle of it I felt her hand press something into the breast pocket of my jacket. Small. Folded. The edges crisp, like she'd prepared it in advance. She didn't say anything. I didn't look down. The song kept playing. When it ended and the floor opened up for other dancers, she kissed my cheek and pulled back and looked at me for just a second longer than felt like a regular look. Then Callum was there, taking her hand, and she was smiling again, and I was being steered toward a table by my brother-in-law, who wanted to tell me something about the price of fuel in Alberta. I excused myself to the washroom. I stood at the sink and unfolded the note. "Dad, don't sign anything tonight. Please. I'll explain everything. I'm sorry. I love you." I read it 3 times. My face in the mirror looked like someone I didn't entirely recognize. I refolded it and put it back in my pocket and walked back out into the noise of the reception. The thing about a moment like that is you can't react to it. There are 200 people around you. Your daughter is dancing with her new husband. The DJ is playing something that everyone under 40 seems to know, and you are standing there holding a grenade with the pin already pulled, and you have to just keep smiling. Keep holding your wine glass. Keep nodding when people talk to you. I found my wife between the dessert table and the seating chartboard. I pulled her close under the pretense of a slow dance that wasn't happening, and I told her quietly that I needed her to help me stay upright for the rest of the evening without explaining why. She looked at me the way she's looked at me for 38 years, like she can read the severity level without needing the details. And she said, "Okay, just that." I spent the next 2 hours watching Callum. Not obviously. I wasn't going to make a scene. But I watched him the way I'd learned to watch things over 40 years working in land surveying. Methodically tracking edges and reference points, noting what didn't line up. At one point he came and sat beside me during a lull. He had his jacket off by then, sleeves rolled up, perfectly relaxed. He asked me how I was enjoying the evening. I told him it was a beautiful event. He said he thought so too, and then, in the same conversational tone, he said he hoped we'd have a chance soon to finalize the paperwork. I kept my expression completely neutral. "Which paperwork is that?" He smiled. "Just the property transfer my lawyer drafted, for the cottage. Nothing complicated, it's just cleaner from a tax standpoint to have it in both our names now that we're family. Saves headaches down the road. My wife and I own a cottage on Calabogie Lake. We've owned it since 1987. My father helped me make the down payment. I have spent more good hours there than I can count, and it is worth. In the current market, in this part of the province, considerably more than I will say publicly. I had never discussed transferring that cottage to anyone. Not with my wife, not with my daughter, not with our financial planner. I'll have to take a look at it, I said. Of course, he said, and clapped me on the shoulder and went to get another drink. I sat very still for a moment. Then I took out my phone and typed a message to my daughter. When can we talk? She replied within 2 minutes. Monday. Please don't say anything before then. I'm okay. I put my phone away, and I watched my son-in-law work the room, laughing with his colleagues, charming my wife's relatives, refilling glasses without being asked, and I thought about the note and the cottage and the particular kind of dread that had been sitting in my chest since the ceremony, and I began to understand that I hadn't been paranoid. I had just been slow. Monday came, and my daughter drove out to the house alone. Callum was at work. She sat at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of tea, and she talked for 2 hours, and I listened. It had started, she said, about 8 months earlier. Small things she hadn't thought much about at first. Callum mentioning the cottage in conversations with his colleagues, describing it in a way that suggested ownership. Callum asking once, casually, whether my wife and I had updated our wills recently. Callum telling her that his financial advisor had suggested getting her name on some of your parents' assets before the wedding, for estate planning purposes, because Quebec inheritance law was changing. He'd said Quebec, even though we live in Ontario, and at the time she'd accepted the confusion without questioning it. Then, 3 weeks before the wedding, she had found documents on his laptop. She hadn't been snooping. She had been looking for a shared folder with their honeymoon hotel confirmation. The documents were in a folder called Estate Planning M Family, M for my last name. There were 2 of them. One was a draft property transfer agreement for the Calabogie cottage, already filled in with our names and property description, with a signature line that had my name on it. The other was a letter to a private wealth management firm with a summary of what he described as my wife's and my anticipated estate. Itemized, the cottage, the investment accounts, the RRSP values he'd apparently estimated from something my daughter had mentioned in passing. She said she had sat in front of that laptop for 20 minutes without moving. Then she closed it and went to make dinner and did not say anything, because she needed time to understand what she was looking at. She told herself there might be an explanation. She tried to find one for 3 weeks. She couldn't. She'd written the note in the car on the way to the venue, sitting in the parking lot while her bridesmaids were inside. She said she didn't know how to cancel the wedding. There were 200 people. Everything was paid for. She had kept telling herself she might be wrong. But she couldn't let me sign anything without warning me. So she put it in my pocket when she had 30 seconds alone with me, and she trusted me not to react until she could explain. I am 64 years old. I built my career measuring things precisely, getting the numbers right, not cutting corners. I had put a down payment on that cottage with money I had earned by doing things the slow and careful way, and I had intended to leave it to my daughter someday, and the man she had just married had been moving toward it like a surveyor, laying claim to land he'd already decided was his. I told my daughter that I loved her, and that none of this was her fault, and that we were going to handle it properly. Then I called our family lawyer. Her name isn't relevant here. What is relevant is that she had handled our affairs for 15 years, and that she called me back within the hour, and when I described the documents my daughter had found, there was a pause on the line, and then she said, "Do not sign anything, and I need to see those documents before the end of the week." My daughter photographed everything and sent the files. Our lawyer reviewed them and confirmed what I had suspected. The property transfer had no legitimate tax basis. The scenario Callum had described to me at the reception was, in her words, constructed. The cottage was already held in a way that provided the estate planning protections he claimed to be offering. There was nothing to correct. The transfer would have simply moved a significant asset out of my wife's and my ownership and into one where Callum had equal legal claim. She also noted something that I had not noticed. The document had been prepared by a notary in Ottawa. She knew this notary's firm. She made a call. That call led to another. The notary, when approached, initially maintained professional distance, but there were questions about whether he had prepared documentation without independent legal counsel being offered to the transferring parties, my wife and myself, and whether the preparation had met his professional obligations under the Law Society's guidelines. That inquiry went to the Law Society of Ontario. Callum, when my daughter confronted him with what she knew, did not deny it. He said she had misunderstood the document. He said his intentions had been to protect the family. He said the notary had suggested the whole approach. When she told him that the notary's conduct was under review and that our lawyer had all the documentation, he stopped talking. They separated 4 months after the wedding. The marriage was brief enough that the division of property was, legally, relatively clean. They had kept most of their finances separate before the marriage, and there was no shared real estate in either of their names. My daughter had been careful about that, even before she found the documents. Some part of her had always been careful. The notary received a formal reprimand from the Law Society. He did not lose his license outright, but the reprimand is part of the public record now. Callum went back to his consulting firm. I have no information about what came next for him, and I don't need it. What I think about sometimes, driving up to Calabogie in early June when the lake is still cold, and the dock needs to be put back in, and the birch trees along the shore are that particular pale green they only are for about 2 weeks of the year. What I think about is my daughter in a parking lot writing a note by hand because she didn't know what else to do. She was trying to protect me. She had walked down an aisle in a dress that took 4 months to find, and while she was doing it, she was also holding a secret she didn't know how to carry, and the only thing she could think of was to fold it up and put it in my pocket and trust me to understand. I understood. I have tried to teach my daughter, over the years, the things that seemed important. How to read a contract before signing, how to ask questions when something doesn't sit right, how to trust the feeling that the ice might not hold. She had learned all of it. She used all of it. She did, in the end, exactly what she needed to do. The cottage is still in my name and my wife's name. We have updated our wills properly, with full independent legal advice. My daughter comes up on long weekends and sits on the dock in the evening, and sometimes we talk, and sometimes we just watch the water, and that's enough. Last summer she mentioned she had started seeing someone new, a teacher from Perth, soft-spoken, with a daughter of his own. She seemed careful about it in the way she's careful about things now, and when I asked if she liked him, she said, "I like that he doesn't ask questions he doesn't need answers to." I thought that was about the best thing I'd heard in a long time.